having said that, like it's really clear from the presentation you gave that they can conceive of a world that they own a giant fleet of driverless cars.
Right.
Which, it's for all they talk about, looking after their drivers, cut them off at the knees.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, who needs drivers? We're going to have driverless cars.
But even just the basics with Tesla, you get in the car and there's no engine because you don't need an engine.
Yeah.
So there's two boots, one in the front, one in the back.
Yep.
Then there's no gear shift, so it's just like driving a golf cart. It just gets faster.
Yeah.
If it breaks down and you call the service support number, you just connect to the internet and download a software patch because there's nothing mechanical that can break.
Yeah.
You're either out of charge or there's the software.
Yeah, one of my wanky mates has got a Tesla. It's got 27 moving parts in the drive shaft versus 100,000 or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And if you think about it, how antiquated is it that you're creating a combustion? You're forcing a liquid fuel into a chamber and setting it alight to move a car.
Yeah.
Think about it.
But I love that they have the one section on it called insane mode. That someone has hacked and turned into oh shit mode, where when you push the pedal all the way down,
insane or something.
instead of saying you're in insane mode, it actually pops up with the graphic of oh shit. I'm like, that's great.
So what about if we have designerless design? Is that going to spook Adobe?
Designerless design.
You got driverless cars.
I
mean, you do have that platform called Wix, where they say.
Driverless cars kind of maybe gets rid of bad drivers, but I don't know. Designerless design freaks me out a little bit. That entire concept now means that we've got probably a lot more bad.
I think there's a website called The Grid where it promises to just design everything for you in minutes. And apparently it's some huge success.
And is there people behind it, or is it
some algorithm?
AI?
I mean, there's people behind it, but it's algorithms doing it. Figuring out for you what your site should look like and changing it on the fly. Check it out, The Grid. I've never used it, but I read about it. And humans, I'm sure, are still always going to be the final arbiters until we get to a Terminator-like world. then the Tesla cars become Carmageddon.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
All right, I want to get started because I know it's going to be a lot of discussion. So guys, thank you for coming. This is our launch this week of the 2015 Digital Marketing Performance Dashboard. Those of you who have been covering us for a while know what this is all about. It's our 4th iteration. The way we'll run things today is I'll get Liz to run through the presentation. Please jump in and have a discussion as we go through, and we'll also have a chat and Q&A at the end as well. So I'll hand over to Liz to go forward, and I'll send you a press release and a report after this.
Are we embargoed?
Embargoed until Thursday.
Right.
So thank you guys for coming, and I appreciate you all being here today. So this is the 4th year that we have done this review of how digital marketing performance is really evolving and moving forward across Asia and the Pacific. Just really quick, I know that most of you kind of know this already. Wait, let's see here. Let me figure out how many different ways I can mess up not doing this correctly. Here we go. Maybe? There we are. Okay, so just really quickly about the CMO Council. So as an organization, we represent over 9,000, now the number is 9,700 senior corporate marketing leaders around the world. When we add up the companies who are part of the CMO Council, we estimate that their average advertising spend and the marketing spend that they control is about $450 billion US that's spent around the world. And one of the reasons why people become members of the CMO Council is really not only to contribute their own best practices and share how they are actually advancing in various parts of marketing, but also to figure out what their peers are actually doing to keep advancing the role of marketing and keep advancing the role of the CMO. So founded in 2001 when there weren't that many CMOs around, and we did kind of feel crazy, but one of the things that I pulled from a Forrester report that I thought was really interesting about the top 10 technology predictions for Asia Pac this year kind of made me sit back and realize that what we've been talking about here in partnership with Adobe for the past 4 years and really talking about the advancing of technology is really being affirmed by a lot of other organizations, Forrester certainly being one of them, where in a report they said regional organizational inertia would be the biggest hurdle to digital transformation in 2015, and that's certainly what we're seeing across the region. We're seeing that there are certainly leaders, Australia certainly being one of them. There are laggards in the space, but everyone is hurtling forward. And those organizations that are able to almost get out of their own way and really begin to make some substantive change in digital transformation are really going to be those that are going to be ahead of this tidal wave of business that's heading towards Asia Pac, rife with all of their customer experience and their digital channels. That kind of leads us to the fact that because we're in a new world, we needed a new dashboard. So for those of you who have kind of seen the dashboard evolve over the past years, you know that we've really looked at 4 key areas of digital marketing performance. They all really sat within what I probably call more of that operational mindset, right? It was, does the leadership support digital marketing? Do you have the tools and skill sets and the strategies in place to implement new channels, to aggregate data from those channels? But we were really focused on the channel, and we were focused on the leadership and the organization. All great things to be focused on, but what we started to realize was there was kind of 2 big areas that were missing. And it's really around the content and the deployment of that content. We had completely almost overlooked how people were not only creating that content, sharing it across the organization, but then how they were connecting channel and content together to reach the customer. So this year we decided to rectify that situation, and we actually created 2 new categories of investigation in the dashboard. One being creative empowerment, and the second being content velocity. So if we look into kind of what those 2 things started to mean, when we started to look at creative empowerment, we wanted to look at the organization's commitment to developing and deploying a true multi-channel engagement. Did they have the workflow that allowed for the organization to collaborate and optimize content that was actually being created? Was there a strategic mandate to have a content strategy, to actually have a cohesive story that could be translated into this digital customer experience? Or were we just kind of creating things as we went? Was it really largely ad hoc? And did the organization have a commitment to customer experience? And I think that really became a key point of conversation as we were developing this kind of next iteration of the dashboard. Did the organization, and from a senior leadership perspective, did they get it? Were they actually on board with experience? Because I think there are a lot of organizations that arguably probably aren't, but they need to be, because quite frankly, that's where our customers are. Content velocity, on the other hand, is really talking about, do we have a commitment to actually create the content that's required to meet the expectations of our customers? Do we have systems and tools in place that can generate personalized content at scale and in real time? There are plenty of tools and there are plenty of strategies out there that can look to personalize banner advertising, kind of individual pieces of content. But are we truly creating experiences that are relevant for that individual based on the intelligence that we're bringing back into the organization? The other part of content was really around mobile. We couldn't ignore it anymore. We had a couple questions about mobile in previous surveys, but we really felt that very strongly that if customer experience was going to advance, you had to have tools and strategies in place that enabled a mobile-first mindset when it came to strategy, but then also allowed you to create content and create digital experiences that could be flexible. Were you online? Were you mobile? And it shouldn't just be one dropped into the other. Could you create that true omni-channel experience and create those types of transactions and experiences that the customer were expecting in each of those different channels, and could you be nimble about it? So that's really the kind of the 2 new areas of conversation that we have added. Just some kind of quick, generalized, like kind of what we were thinking, because a lot of times people will ask me, when you started asking questions about this, what were you thinking in the back of your head? And a lot of times we think kind of, why do we want to talk about customer experience? And I think fundamentally, customer experience comes down to 2 really important things. A, our customer, and B, revenue. We start to talk about that it really is, in the back of the marketer's mind, we understand it's more expensive to actually go out and get a new customer than it is to reach and retain an existing customer.
The budgets reflect that, because I've never seen a budget.
No, they don't. And unfortunately, we're still at the 80-20 mindset where 80% of our strategies are looking at acquisition and 20% are looking at retention. But the reality is what customer experience and adopting a customer experience strategy and a mindset enables us to do is look at each of our customers either at the point of acquisition or at that point of retention as constantly being able to retell their story. And it's a very different mindset that you have to take on and a very different strategy that you actually have to be able to accept.
Do you have any examples of where anyone has done that, where they've put more money into retention rather than acquisition of new customers? And that it's paid
Not
off
here.
for them?
Paul, I don't know if you have any here in Australia that you can think of.
It's almost like you draw a maturity curve, and you look at organisations start off a digital experience change by looking at the final conversion, how many customers kind of get to the top of the funnel, and how many can kind of convert to customers in some way, shape or form. We're now having, and that was the conversation 2 or 3 years ago, we're now having a lot of conversation with customers that are saying to us the ongoing experience that the customer has, both digitally and non-digitally, needs to align and be better. What's his name? Todd Copeland at NAB spoke a lot about that at Summit, when he spoke about the fact that for them, the user experience in branch, the user experience online and on app, it needs to start to come together. We just actually finished doing a very large piece of work in Abu Dhabi with Etihad Airlines. I'll pause and say there in 1 second. Where it was interesting, and so this was, in fact, I don't know, that's out now, right, that release, Etihad? Yes. So where the CTO had a conversation around, what led their conversation around digital investment was around their guest experience. And what they said was, we have a reputation globally for an amazing in-flight experience. Our planes are luxurious, we have nannies on board, we have the suites, that's what we do. We're the top tier of luxury on the plane. Yet our experience in the airport and our experience in the lounge and our experience online doesn't match that. And so the angle went from acquisition to just an amazing experience. So we are starting to see that conversation come through.
Would it also be that, you know, you've got companies trying loyalty programs to try and retain those customers, but they usually seem to stuff that up, and you've got Woolworths radically going to rechange its loyalty
the other thing in some cases is that, and Liz can talk to this a lot, but the structure of the marketing organisation matters a lot here. If there's an acquisition team and there's an ongoing loyalty team, you've got 2 different strategies, and that needs to come together.
And I think an example of where we've seen that happen is actually in the States with T-Mobile. And I mean, I think that T-Mobile as a whole, they had a CEO. Yeah, well, but it's funny because I think it sounds like a thing, but it actually was a huge seismic shift for their organization. In that you have a CEO that basically woke up one day and marched into a C-suite and said, "That's it, we're done. I don't want to make any decisions that make us feel like one of the big carriers." And he empowered all of his C-suite and all lines of business to actually behave and act and action in that manner. And what's interesting is for their acquisition and retention business, like Paul said, they were very separate. And in fact, retention was actually part of their loyalty and customer service division originally. So they actually considered retention to be that script on the customer service call that when an angry customer called in, they said, "Well, let me reduce your rate." You know, so it was like that was the retention strategy.
That's the Comcast strategy.
Right.
They want to kill that company.
Right. But what they did was they actually went out and they hired a woman who had run loyalty programs for airlines for decades. They brought her in, and the first thing she said was, "If I'm going to own retention, I'm also going to own data." And so what I need to see is I need to see the customer across the entire organization. I need to know how many times they called in angry. I need to know how many times they have tried to switch plans and programs. And for the first time, because they were the uncarrier, she could do it. You know, she could actually go in and make those calls and go in and make those shifts to the organization.
It sounds like what a lot of other businesses are doing, just breaking down all the silos, so that people can have.
There's a great cartoon that says every time I hear someone say, "I want to break down a silo, I want to break down your face," because I think that, you know, and it's humorous, but I think the reality is that we have
silos.
But we as marketers are great silo builders.
Yeah.
So as much as I can sit here as a marketer and tell you that yes, absolutely, the answer seems quite simple, and it's break down all the silos. Marketing as an organization, and as you know, if we were our own tribe, we're the best silo builders in the entire organization. Because I have email that sits over here, I have social that sits over here. I've now taken digital and made it go sit over in the corner over there. And those are the kids in the hoodies, and they do the cool stuff. But then traditional and events, you go sit over here. And I think that really smart organizations are beginning to figure out that it's not about those individual channels, it's not about those individual points. It is about the customer experience. And they are looking, you know, Etihad is a great example of that, where they're saying, let's take this from the point of view of our customer. No Etihad customer goes, you know, and I'm really just satisfied with the on-plane experience being the one that's luxurious. Everything else could just go to crap, because that's a different department.
The other thing I'll add to that is that it's in a commercial negotiation phase where we're a tech vendor selling technology that underpins the digital experience. The conversation is, in the majority of cases, around architecture. It's about how the technology can combine with core infrastructure technology. If it's a bank, it's the core IT that runs the ATM machines, it's the networks. It's how do we sync that into an IT platform that can become manageable for the organisation as a whole, that the CIO or CTO can see an ROI from, etc. So that's generally where you end up, because at the end of the day, it's technology. The UX piece, the experience piece, is back in the marketing team. And the interesting thing about UX is that UX is, everyone has an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at the end of the day, everyone's got an opinion on the next brand campaign. So it's actually very easy to align an organisation around a technology strategy, because you can put milestones in place, you can do an RFP, you can compare technology, you can compare feature and function. It's very difficult to corral the cats when you're talking about UX.
Yeah. And I think that what all of this comes down to is when we start talking about cost and revenue, right? When we start talking about the implementation of technology, making these types of changes to our organizations, everyone always asks, well, does customer experience actually pay? And do these types of changes actually pay? So I come at it from 2 points of view. First is the global view from Forrester's Customer Experience Index, where they take the S&P 500, they begin to rank where customers fall within that customer experience index. Of those companies that they rank, the CX leaders, kind of that top 10 group, saw stock share and value increase by up to 22%. The laggards, the bottom group on that list, they actually saw stock loss and value loss up to 46%. And this was during a 5-year period when the S&P was absolutely flat. So there were no major market fluctuations that were actually causing this level of fluctuation. It was all because of CX implementations and strategies that they put in place. I also look at it from the APAC perspective, where we did a study around the state of customer experience across Asia Pacific, and we asked marketers, have you measured the impact of your customer experience strategy improvements? 41% say that they have a direct correlation between their customer experience strategy improvements and increased revenue. 18% saw a revenue increase between 5 and 10%. Let's say that you were even in that group that's a 15% that saw revenue increases between 1 and 5%. I will take a 1 and 5% in revenue increase every day of the week, right? That is no small potatoes. So, and this is really because the alignment around customer experience also directly correlates to an alignment around the customer. And we are seeing that customers are willing to pay more for quality customer experiences where they are embraced and they are known by the organizations that they're working with. We also have done a study here, and part of the study that we did around customer experience is we asked marketers across Asia and the Pacific to think of a brand that they buy from, like as a customer. Think of a brand where they admire the customer experience of that brand, right? Who was that? Keep that in your mind, and then tell us what's the number one thing that that brand does to be a customer experience leader. The number one thing, according to 58% of the marketers that we talked to, was a clear, consistent message across all touch points. Right? Number two, 55% saying that they had an innovative approach to personalization and customer communication. So content, personalization, and an experience that is cohesive and tied together in a multi-channel approach is absolutely what marketers believe that best of breed brands are doing.
Sorry, just interrupt.
Yeah.
I reckon if you asked that question to people that went into shops and bought stuff, you wouldn't get answers that looked anything like that because they don't care. If you said to somebody, why do you reckon Apple's such a great experience? They wouldn't say because of their clear, consistent message across all touch points.
Right. But you know what is interesting is when we did do a consumer-focused study on customer experience. Gosh, I want to say about 8 years ago now. It's really, I first joined the CMO Council. One of the first studies that I did. And it was called the Variance in Customer Experience. And we went out and we asked 4,000 consumers to go and take a specific brand and tell us what was the best thing about your experience. Then we took 50 brands and we hired a bunch of students, and we had these students go and experience every single touch point that you possibly could experience across that entire brand. We ranked all of them based on what consumers told us was important to them, and based on what those experiences were for the 50 brands. The top brand, the number one brand, oddly enough, Home Depot. Why? Because you got exactly what you were promised from the brand message, no matter where you chose to engage with Home Depot. And so the comments that we got from consumers were, I want to know that the brand I'm working with is the brand I'm working with. I don't want to go into the store and have one experience and go online and get something different. Price, promotion, all of that messaging comes into what is essentially a clear and consistent message. If you go in store and say it's $10 off, you go online and you say it's $5 off, yet on mobile it says it's $15 off, number one thing that will frustrate a consumer.
That happened to me. I had to complain to the management, and they gave it to me at the price the stupid website said it was going to be. And in the store, it wasn't there at all. There was no indication of that promo. It's an online-only promo, they said. And I said, on the website, it says you've got to come into the store to get it.
Right.
There was a real. So in the end, I just had to say, look, take it.
Right. But that really does speak to clear, consistent, reliable, and trusted experiences with a brand that you believe you have a promise with.
So what do you think the customers would say then?
I think, well, I'm going to hang up the word message. I don't think customers think in terms of messages. I think they think in terms of experiences. Maybe we're talking about the same thing. But if I think about it, I've actually just done this in the US. I've just spent 2 weeks going into different places and looking at things. And the ones that are, the most, most of these are retailers that I've never had anything to do with in my entire life.
Right.
They're all US brands. And the ones that were most striking were the ones where the experience was just, well, like Warby Park, you walk into a Warby Park store, you feel like you're walking into an online store that's been made real. Like it has that sort of vibe.
Right.
So I think it might just be the language.
Yeah, it is more language, but I do think you bring up a good point, and I think that segues really nicely into what we're talking about with the dashboard, which is across Asia and the Pacific, the reality is that consumers have an expectation for service, they have an expectation for experience, but their expectations are not necessarily being driven by Asia Pacific brands. I was in Indonesia last year, and we were sitting there in Malaysia last year, and we were talking about customer experience. And one of the marketers said, my customers want an experience that's like Nordstrom. And I looked around and said, you don't have Nordstrom here. Like Nordstrom is a Seattle-based shopping center. Like no one has that, but they can go online, they can read about the experience, they can read about people talking about the experience. Everyone wants the Amazon experience where everything's highly personalized, where there are all those recommendations. So that level of kind of expectation is what's being put onto today's customer experience. It has to connect both online and off. It has to be deeply personalized. So with that expectation in mind, let's jump into what we found in the study here. We've got about 903 total respondents across the region. We had a pretty decent industry mix and across type. What's interesting is that the majority of organizations actually consider them to be both B2B and B2C. That's largely in kind of the retail, FMCG, those kind of groups that are not only dealing with kind of their immediate sales channel, but they're also marketing to the end consumer. But you have 39% B2B, 20% B2C, and then 41% saying both. About 44% say that they have revenues and yearly revenues in excess of $1 billion. So not a pretty nice mix between kind of large and small organizations. And 31% have a title of either CMO, head of marketing, or SVP of marketing. When it breaks down by country, you'll see that 114 of our respondents specifically come from Australia. This year, for the first time, we broke out New Zealand as its own little story. It is, I think as much as we like to lump Australia and New Zealand into Asia Pacific, we do love to lump Australia and New Zealand together like you're one big landmass. But two very, very different stories there.
So I'm sorry to interrupt there, but go back. The only problem I have with the respondents is it's not, in a sense, you can't wait because China's ridiculous, but is there a danger because it's pretty much equal representation of each market, you start to get a skewed view of APAC? I mean, there's such variance between some of the markets. Yeah,
there is a variance between some of the markets, but we're not looking at consumer populations, and because we're not talking to consumer populations, we don't have to take in the variance of the size of population, because business population is fairly even across all of those. So, Andrew, you're just gonna be hard on me today, aren't you? You're normally not this hard on me. Are you being hard on me today because Paul's here? Is it because of Paul?
I haven't really.
He's hungover.
No.
One person who didn't drink on the
Did you fly this morning?
Yeah.
In the States?
No, I was up in Queensland. I had to get up at 5 o'clock to get a plane to get down here.
How stupid is that daylight saving thing with Sydney, Queensland? Anyway, sorry.
So here's our dashboard, and this is where we're starting. So we've got the traditional 4 up there on the top, and then we've got the creative empowerment and content velocity on the bottom. We're going to go through each of these so I don't have to make you look at the tiny, tiny little type. that goes under there. So let's talk about marketing readiness. 84% are using analytics and reporting technology. 68% of the market is currently measuring and testing. This is certainly up. So we're seeing over a 4-year period. You're gonna be hard pressed to find people who are like, analytics, reporting, don't need it. So we're actually pretty happy that these numbers are continuing to get higher. So
that's out of 10. Sorry.
Yes, it is out of 10. Yeah. So let me just state right now, I get super excited when people hit a 5 out of 10 on this dashboard.
Okay.
You will understand why I get super excited at these high numbers and are thinking, woo, high kicks, right? Because the other side is where I tend to get really depressed. But we are seeing this increase and improve year over year, which I think is really the best thing about this and the best thing about being able to watch this year over year. You have about 28% saying that they have a high level of marketing maturity. They really feel like they either are doing quite well or they have a progressive and disciplined approach. They're trying new technologies, they're testing and piloting, they're really moving forward in what they believe is advancing and moving the needle.
Do you mind if I just add a couple of comments as you go through this? So I think, so at a customer level, it's safe to say that everyone has an analytics strategy now. The less mature customers are still at a web analytics base, tagging pages and analysing web traffic. The more advanced organisations are now heavily looking into algorithmic attribution modelling, predictive analytics, and really moving from tracking the business to predicting the business.
And I think that as you see more businesses reach that advanced point that Paul's talking about, you're actually going to see those top 2 marks also begin to improve, because that means the organization is fundamentally thinking about data differently. They're not thinking about data as a reporting tool, they're thinking about data as an advancement, they're thinking about data as something that's actually differentiating them from the rest of the organization, from the rest of mass communication. So the two things are absolutely tied hand in hand. When we talk about progress, you'll see again, when it comes to it's largely being driven by the reporting and the analytics and the evolution of how we're looking at analytics and reporting. So we are seeing progress year over year, which is great. We can't say that of all the sectors, so we like to be really happy about this one. Organizational alignment. The nice thing here is that we are seeing increasing support and strong management support, and that leaders of organizations are really receptive to piloting and testing of new technologies. So we've got a senior management that is ready for digital. You have very few organizations out there that say that their senior leadership team actually wants to reduce digital spend, which I think is a terrific point. You have 41% say that they believe they actually have a strong digital marketing champion on the leadership team. So to what Paul was talking about earlier with some of the changes of NAB and Etihad as examples, these are people who have not only strong leadership support, but they have a strong digital champion that's willing to actually make that leap from kind of the technology infrastructure into that customer experience dialogue. So that's where we're really seeing leaders kind of emerge and kind of jump forward in the pack.
This is also one area where we see Australia significantly ahead of the other parts of the region. And excuse me, before we went through. I spoke a lot about this last year, but we still see in countries in the region where there is a tenure-based hierarchical system in place, and by that I mean the longer you've been there, the more senior you become, that the level of digital expertise and the willingness of someone who is at the end or the twilight of their career, because they've grown up and spent most of their career outside of the world of digital, are not willing to really drive that change. And yet in the more mature markets, it's not uncommon to find a CEO or a CMO in the late 30s, early 40s, really passionate and driving it. In Asia, you very rarely find someone at that demographic running a marketing organization. Normally it's much further on in the career. And then there's a very big difference in the conversations.
And I think in certain markets too, you also end up where marketing is also maturing. So the definition of what marketing means to the organization is fundamentally changing. You would be hard pressed 5 years ago to go into, say, Korea and find a respected marketing organization.
And the other thing too here, we talk about the issue that boards have in this country. So if you focus on Australia for a second, there's very few boards of Australian public companies that have a digital champion on them. I think Fairfax was one that was called out because Todd Sampson's on the board. And look at the press that he got around that, and the organisation got around putting an advertising guy on the board. Ardent Leisure's another one. But there's a few that have creative professionals and digital experts on the board, but there's a lot that still have the traditional accountants and bankers and lawyers that just don't have a focus as part of the industry now. And it becomes harder for a CEO to pitch against a board a significant investment and change on something the board doesn't necessarily understand.
And if the U.S. is any indicator of where things will kind of continue to evolve, what we're now seeing in the States is not only more marketers being on boards and holding board level positions, but we're actually now seeing CMOs actually rise to CEOs. So when you look at Taco Bell is a perfect example of an organization where their CEO, their current CEO, actually used to be the CMO of both, spent time at both the Pizza Hut and the Taco Bell brands. Here in Asia Pacific, actually, the CEO of Taco Bell and Pizza Hut is their former CMO. So as customer experience rises in that rank.
You've got the ex-CMO of Tourism Australia and the CEO of Red Balloon as an example, Sydney Baker.
Mm-hmm. So I think as customer becomes the focus, you're going to start seeing that more and more.
In fact,
You'll
another one
start
is,
seeing that improvement.
so you'll all be aware of Andy Lark, who is the CMO of Combank. He's now the Chief Commercial Officer.
Zero.
Yeah. Good thing he didn't go to Brookhaven. I think the one challenge that we have here, and I think it goes back to something that Paul was mentioning in regard to technology, you still have 15% of marketers believing that, only 15% saying that IT is a big contributor. That number is up, so that's good-ish, I think. But the reality is there's still some friction there in between that marketing and the IT relationship. It's not necessarily happening at the CMO and CIO level, because I think as C-suite officers, there is a focus on the business. I think that it's when it gets down into kind of the functional ranks and when you start to look at the really competing priorities oftentimes of the marketing team and the IT team, there's still some challenges there. So I think there's still a lot of work that can be done there between that alignment between technology and marketing. But again, I do think that really comes from, again, that very top point of the senior management that's actually supporting and more receptive to piloting and technology and applying new technologies. The reality here is that organizational alignment, there's been a dip. So in 2014, we did 3.7, 2015 at 3.5. And really the dip, very interestingly, is most notably from sales and channel teams that aren't as enthusiastic as in previous years. In 2014, 35% of marketers said it was actually sales and channel that was pushing for more investment. We saw that dip to about 28% this year. Quite frankly, it's largely because we have a lot more B2B organizations reply in this year, and in previous years, B2B organizations, sales teams will look at digital as an instant driver of leads and opportunity into the pipeline. So they oftentimes are the ones that are really advocating for more spend in that area. So I think that as our panel fluctuates, we begin to see that fluctuate a little bit. So I'm not as worried about this minor dip in this, because the reality is that leadership is actually quite supportive. We have more leaders and senior leaders actually saying, yes, we want more investment because of the process of kind of the experimentation, the piloting, the testing, and the results that we've provided back to the organization, that we are seeing a greater willingness to actually kind of invest more and kind of expand those programs. You look like you have a question.
Do you have these numbers for Australia only? Or Australia and New Zealand?
I do. Hang on just a second. Give me a second.
I
know. I feel like I need to toss Paul a question while I look up these numbers so you guys can have that conversation.
You can get them later.
Yeah, let me give this. Let me give this to you.
Just something you said before, the difference between the sort of hierarchical tenure-based thing. I wonder if part of the reason that because there is an issue at board level in Australia, is that the reality is board level it is tenured and hierarchical.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been asked to do a number of board level presentations on behalf of the CEO of an organisation. So in a typical sales cycle in this market, we will engage, generally speaking, with marketing.
Yep.
And sometimes with the CTO office, if there is a CTO office, but actually rarely with the CIO office. It's just not where we engage from a marketing automation perspective.
Yep.
The CMO, CTO will lead the conversation with the CEO, and given the investment required in these emerging technologies, it generally requires the CEO to have either budgetary sign-off or certainly be across the project, because these are transformation projects. So more often than not in a sales cycle, I'll get called in by my sales team to come and meet with the CEO of the organisation to have a conversation about our resources in country to support the project and make sure there's a comfort level between what you expect between two commercial enterprises agreeing on a contract.
Yep.
interestingly, I have been asked a number of times to, on behalf of the CEO, to come along to the next board meeting as a special guest and literally just talk about the industry. Not necessarily about their project, because that's the CEO's project, but just to provide some market awareness to the board. And without giving examples of exactly who, some of the questions that you get are very, I'm trying to use the right word because you could quote me on this, but very, it lacks depth of awareness of the market, it lacks awareness of the opportunity, and I think it also lacks awareness of what's happening across the channel of marketing now. And there still is this perception that marketing is either a branding engine or it's a pipeline generation engine for the sales organization. And so I started talking, like, we chatted before just about the disruptive technologies of Uber, and we talked about the fact that it's completely API led, it's technology led. They don't own anything. Airbnb is another example of an organization that has a market cap in excess of the 3 biggest hotel groups in the world, but doesn't own any property. These kind of disruptive technologies and the way they influence organizations, it's big. There's a level of awareness of the brands. There's a level of awareness of, certainly there's a strong awareness around valuations and capital raising and why there's a bubble in that area. There's a distinct lack of awareness of the underlying technology and the impact that it can have on the company.
Back to your question about Australia, 51% of marketers in Australia say they have very strong leadership support. Right? And compared to, and then as far as channel and sales teams that are pushing for more digital spend, it's 24%. So let's talk about one of my most depressing stops on the dashboard, that being marketing skills. There are two parts to this. There's the kind of understanding of what skills need to be brought into an organization and what type of mindset we need to have, and the reality of kind of what we're doing. So 35% say that there's a dedicated director of digital or interactive marketing. This is extremely positive, because what this indicates to us, and if you remember that the majority of response to this really do hold that CMO, SVP, or head of marketing title, that means at the very top of the marketing organization, they are bringing in dedicated support, dedicated, really talented people to drive digital. It's no longer kind of just an afterthought into the entire marketing ecosystem. So bringing in that talent is an incredibly positive move. 10% have a dedicated and experienced in-house digital marketing analytics team. I think we're going to start to see this grow. It kind of points back to something that Paul was talking about the kind of the evolution of how we think about these reporting and analytics tools. As we bring them on, we're going to start bringing on more dedicated in-house and experienced staff that's really going to be able to turn this data into real customer intelligence and feed that back into the organization. So hopefully year over year, we're going to keep seeing that grow, and it's certainly something we are seeing. Agencies are also improving. 16% feels really low when it comes to extremely effective, but that's actually higher than it's been in any other year. So while we're seeing our in-house teams grow and become more experienced and effective, we're also seeing agencies begin to really come up with that and really provide just strategy, execution, and measurement. The last data point is the data point that year over year, every year, I just beg marketing to please start thinking about data differently. And it's that only 9% believe that data is not only integrated throughout the marketing lifecycle, but that data is actually a competitive differentiator for their brands. If this is the one thing that I could somehow just convince marketers of, yes, data is actually very, very different. This would be the one thing that I would hope would come out of my communicating about this dashboard, because it is really, I personally believe, something that's holding marketing back and holding our skills back and really holding customer experience back. So we can continue to look at data as this kind of campaign KPI reporting tool, and we're not actually leveraging it as a differentiator for our brand. Yet meanwhile, we can all come up with examples, NAD, Etihad, we come up with examples all day long of brands who have made that step, who have actually turned data into a differentiator for them, have improved the customer experience because of that intelligence. They're doing it, it's possible. So hopefully we'll continue to see this number improve.
I think the bottom one is super important, and Liz, I don't need to add to that, was extremely well positioned. The top one for me is interesting. I wouldn't necessarily look at that as a negative, in that some mature organisations have moved past the point of digital and now just embrace digital as being part of marketing.
Right.
And so therefore don't require one. So again, there's a maturity curve requirement as you go through I need a director of digital to separate and focus on it. And then when I'm there, it's just status quo.
Yeah. What I think is also interesting is one of the things that we didn't incorporate into the dashboard in previous years, but it's always something that I keep in mind. The thing that I actually love seeing about where that question and where that data point comes from is the question is actually who owns digital strategy within your organization. And the reality is the majority say that the CMO or the head of marketing owns it. And I love that answer because the reality is that we aren't looking at digital as a one-off. CMOs are looking at digital and saying, no, it's marketing. You know, we're not looking at it and saying, okay, it's traditional versus digital anymore. Digital is traditional now. It is what everyone needs as the cost of doing business. So I love that it's actually owned by the CMO and the CMO takes that ownership. And I think that as we see that responsibility grow and as the CMO continues to own the customer experience, I think all of these numbers will begin to change and fluctuate. But I do love that there is someone who's dedicated and talented and focused on digital, but I actually love that the CMO wants to own it.
Do you think the numbers are lower there because, like, as a region, the scale of enterprise is generally smaller, you know, so they don't have the resources to have those people. You know, a lot of colonial outposts, for want of a better word.
It's interesting you say that because in some of the markets in the region, labour is cheap. So you find they have massive teams. I'll give you an example. We work with some Indian government agencies, and we talk to what we would normally talk about: efficiency and productivity around the technology improvement, and how you can take out cost around headcount or people and put in cost around technology, but you get a better outcome. And their response is it's not what you would think. It's what would we get people to do?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh right. Yeah.
Like we want people to be employed and to work. So it's not always an efficiency conversation. It is for business, not necessarily for government. So that's a conversation with e-government for a second. But there's the marketing teams in Asia are massive. They're not small. But because of the size, there's a lot of manual process. There's a lot less efficiency, I would say, in organisations in countries where labour is less expensive than it is here, which is interesting.
Yeah. So that's sort of a driver to a certain extent. If
Yeah,
you know,
but I
that
think-
efficiency drive, you don't get because the benefits sort of come after, don't they? Because it's all linked together. Yeah.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think that efficiency also takes on a very different picture when you're looking at very large teams, right? It's not necessarily about replacing someone with technology, because I know in the States, the conversation around automation often went with, I've got to reduce my staff size, I've got to create more efficiencies, we've got to do more with less, is always kind of the conversation. So they look to automation to begin to automate and speed up those processes. But one of the interesting things, and we'll actually get to it when we're talking about kind of the creative empowerment, is that one of the biggest challenges that people have in creating that holistic customer experience is actually physically being able to share and collaborate across these giant teams. If you have a giant team, you can't come into a room like this and collaborate effectively, right? You need to have those tools that enable you to be able to share ideas, be able to grow and generate those stories so that you can have that cohesive conversation and not have 90 people at the airport like India does to check your bags, because it's a scary process. I'm always fascinated with it every time. There's like 9 people check your bags, it's great. Okay, so year over year, we had a little bit of a stall between 2013 and 2014 because again, data just stumped everybody in those years. And when I remember back to looking at the data between those 2 years, the reality is that we just couldn't figure out how to get past the fact that we were drinking from a fire hose. And I think that was really, even when I was here in country talking to marketers, the sense that I always got was there's so much that we can collect. There's so much out there. Social is completely throwing us for a loop that we just can't figure out where to start when it comes to actually identifying the data that's going to move the needle. So we just revert back to that comfort zone. So let's just go back to reporting on campaign analytics and calling it value, right? And I think that what we're seeing with this leap forward this year is a lot of the markets being able to see those examples of customer experiences coming together and really making the decision of, we've been able to pilot and test, we've proven what those results are back to our senior leadership. Senior leadership now supports our actions as we're moving forward with digital, and now we're really moving forward, right? There's this sense of, okay, testing's been done, let's race forward, which I think is an incredibly positive kind of state of being for digital across the whole region, whether you're in a leader or a laggard position. Everyone has this forward momentum. So what shifted? Again, data. You see about 7% last year felt that data was to be leveraged as a competitive differentiator. Agency performance is also boosting. This is what I will say about Australia. Australia is on absolutely a path for being a leader when it comes to the utilization of data and thinking about data differently. But Australia has actually shown us a very interesting pattern year over year. And when I started to look at kind of what this process was for Australia and where was the data beginning to shift year over year, this is a little bit about what we found. So here are all the answers in the question of how are you leveraging data, and if every campaign generates mass quantities of data, how are you using it? In the very first dashboard, what we found was even marketers in Australia were predominantly in that area of reporting on KPIs. Okay, we were predominantly using data as campaign reporting tools, kind of using it a little bit as I used to call it like driving in the rearview mirror. We were kind of looking at past performance in order to kind of dictate where we wanted to move forward. We were, a lot of times in the interviews when we would talk to marketers, they would say, well, we need to figure out how to optimize our media mix. We use data for media mix modeling, right, was one of the big questions. What we found is, what's happened in Australia is that more and more marketing leaders are actually moving up this curve, right? We're seeing more marketers actually utilizing data as a continuous improvement tool. They're utilizing it throughout the life cycle of a campaign. They're constantly updating and tweaking to make sure that they're getting the most value out of that individual campaign. That next step is that they're using data to learn more about their customer. They're not just learning about the customer, they're also learning about the market. And they're constantly feeding that information back into the organization. And that kind of final step is that moment when they realize that data really is a competitive differentiator for their brand. They can utilize that data in a very different way. So what we have today is, while the majority of marketers across Asia and the Pacific are really kind of still in that beginning area of looking at data as a KPI reporting tool, about 41% across Asia, what we have is actually only 21% in Australia are still kind of in that kind of campaign reporting box. And you've got about 17% of marketers in Australia that actually see data as a differentiator, compared to 9% across the region. So you're seeing this progress and kind of this path that marketers in Australia have gone on, and how they're advancing and evolving how they think about data and how they use data. And we're beginning to see that same pattern across the rest of Asia.
So I'd say that aligns tightly with we don't as a company break down product line. Obviously we don't even break down country revenue lines, but what I will say is that the take-up of advanced analytics technology, algorithmic-based attribution modeling, predictive analytics, is stronger in Australia than any other marketplace in Asia. And as one organisation in a key vertical deploys that technology, their ability to completely leapfrog or create a gap between their competitors is it's real, and it happens quickly. So what happens generally in this market is that one will get a better understanding of the customer base for that vertical, be it a bank or a telco or retailer, and very quickly the other organisations need to catch up. And interestingly, at that point, and Liz will come back to it, so I won't talk about it a lot, but the hardest thing in the Australian market on that area is that there's very few people that are really advanced data scientists that can take that data, use it correctly, and drive it back into the organisation. And that skill is highly valued in the marketplace right now.
Yeah, huge.
Every customer I talk to, Paul, I need people, help me find great people.
It's probably a scale, isn't it? Because it's not just that there are data scientists out there, but what they want is they want data scientists. If you're in retail, you want a data scientist who's got exposure to retail.
You want vertical expertise, you want the ability to negotiate and influence internally, because data scientists generally can be very much an analytical role, but you want someone who's analytical but can also be someone who can impact the organisation through change. And it's very hard to find that combined skills.
You got to stop Tony Davis at Quantum hiring them all.
Now we're going to blame him right back for it, aren't we? I like that. One thing I'll point out though is that, while we say that 41%, and I'm kind of harsh on the 41% that are using data as just this reporting tool, that number is actually quite high in comparison to where we were over the last 3 years, where there was a large population of people that were aggregating and doing nothing with their data. And you found in a lot of areas like China, Korea, Japan, where they were just gathering data and doing nothing with it, or they were simply not even gathering at all. There was just so much that they couldn't even fathom how to start. That is now in the single digits, and we're seeing marketers kind of begin to move up this path. So I think we're going to kind of see this continue on this journey, and as Paul said, you'll start to see those breakout brands, and then everyone has to really race to catch up, or your brand's gone. I mean, kind of the reality of business. Mindset is, I put this last because mindset, this is kind of the category where I kind of feel like it's the, if we aren't there yet, then we're really in trouble kind of area, right? 91% believe that digital marketing will drive competitive advantage. You know, next year, if we're not at like 99% or 100, I'd be stunned and amazed, because I can't think of many organizations that are still sitting there going, no, the billboard by the freeway is really the best way to go. You know, so I think that we are really advancing when it comes to mindset. You know, I love the fact that the reason why we're advancing towards digital is really because of the customer. 66% of marketers believe that customer preference and digital dependency is driving adoption. 60% is actually believing that it's because of better engagement. So you're seeing that the customer is really the one driving this forward. It's not just someone's own passion project anymore. When we started 4 years ago, we had so many marketers say to us, I'm passionate about digital and that's why I'm trying to get this through the organization. You're not seeing that anymore. You're really seeing this being a customer-driven experience, which is incredibly positive. 49% believe that mobile device proliferation and mobile device appeal is what's driving digital. I had an interesting question as we were going through all this data. Someone asked me, shouldn't that be higher? And shouldn't we already just, you know, shouldn't everyone be looking at mobile as being the driver? And you've got to remember, across Asia, there is a wide range of mobile adoption and savvy. You look at Southeast Asia, where your experience with the internet is largely mobile internet. You know, you're not going home and logging on your desktop. India, again, mobile-driven engagement. Whereas in Australia, you've really had internet being high-speed internet, quality internet really being ubiquitous across the country, and mobile growth has really been driving. Whereas in Korea, you'd be hard-pressed to go into the subway and not find every single person on their mobile phone consuming mass quantities of content and having all of their experiences on their devices.
There's a number of organizations in India now that have valuations that are in the billions, Make My Trip, Snapdeal, Flipkart, etc., who are now moving from, at an infrastructure layer, not wanting to manage an app engagement and a web engagement, and have shut down their web strategy and are focusing purely on app, because in countries like India, mobile, to your point, is ubiquitous. PC usage is not. A smartphone on a plan in India is a few dollars a week, as opposed to having to purchase a PC and infrastructure around that. So mobile in this region actually is more advanced than I see from my colleagues in Europe and the United States. So globally, I think that the region, Asia Pacific region, is leading mobile engagement.
Is India more Android than iOS?
India actually is more Android, yes. Yeah. So India, Korea, obviously strong in Android. Yeah. Korea because of the Samsung relationship, but India is very much more Android. Australia and New Zealand is a bit of a mix. Singapore actually is very strong on iOS. China is actually a mix of operating systems. You have Android, you have iOS, but you also have some homegrown operating systems with some of the homegrown players there as well.
And to my point, we're pretty level on mindset. I mean, I think it's one of those things of like, if you really aren't looking at digital, I'm not quite sure what you're doing in business. But you know, that kind of leads us to kind of the two new areas, and I think the two big areas of conversation that really focus on, you know, these next two areas. It's really where I see content, channel, and customer colliding in the best possible way. And the reality is that we as marketers may not necessarily be at that junction to meet them really where we need to be. For creative empowerment, again, when we're looking at how the organization is committed to delivery of that omni-channel and multi-channel experience, only 29% say that they have a commitment to that multi-channel content development, especially when it comes to mobile-ready content. That's a big concern. I was actually really surprised by all of these numbers. I'll be really honest with you, when we launched this survey, and Susie she was on the calls with us when we were going through all this planning, I gotta tell you, I never thought these two numbers would be so low. I really didn't, because so much of marketing's time talks about content development and content marketing strategies. The fact that we don't actually have a cohesive strategy that's embraced by senior management, the fact that we are really creating all of this content at ad hoc and kind of in these little silos of creativity really was quite shocking to me. You have 16% of marketers saying that they have a workflow that enables alignment and collaboration to maximize content velocity. Again, we're creating in these little pockets, and not the entire organization doesn't necessarily know what other parts of the organization is creating. And Paul and I have had a conversation about this. When you have a large brand that individual lines of business are creating things for that individual lines of business, it's very hard to keep track of that.
My view on this one is I think the organisations pivoted as they needed to do so towards digital technology, and it became architectural and how do you do it against core infrastructure technology, and do you do a cloud strategy, and what does that do around, what does that mean around security and indemnity and all the issues that are related when you put your brand assets and your data in the cloud. Now what's happening is, I think everyone agrees that what individuals resonate with isn't data, individuals resonate with is amazing and compelling content. That's what drives the emotive response that enables people to embrace a brand and have brand loyalty, and that purchasing decision is led by the affinity that is created through an emotional connection to content, the logo, the campaign, etc. Our belief, and this is hopefully where our technology strategy is a little bit ahead of where the customers are, our belief is that the ability to create a content velocity story that enables you to do content creation through to content execution, which is effectively content monetization, the faster you can do that, the more optimal your digital strategy can become, and the better the experiences for the customer. So from us, and just to pivot to a tech conversation for a second, this is the entire reason why we acquired an organisation that's now called Adobe Stock, why we have the ability inside of Photoshop for you to edit an image and save it from Photoshop into the Marketing Cloud through the Digital Asset Management tool, onto Experience Manager, into a CMS to the web. It's completely automated. So the ability to use the Adobe Creative Cloud tools to create amazing content and then get it to a customer quickly through the Marketing Cloud, which allows you to layer on the analytics platform, the tag management platform, and the multivariate or A/B testing platform, and using the inside of data or second party or third party data through a DMP, and all that stuff is effectively just to get amazing content to the right person in real time. And the more that you can do that, the better the relationship you're going to have with your customer.
And I always find this whole conversation to be really ironic to some degree, because I think a lot of marketers, I know that me, if I just speak from my own experience, I kind of grew up on the creative side of what Paul just talked about, right? So you show me the Creative Cloud and all the creative assets, and you show me Photoshop, I'm at home, right? That's where I grew up, right? And that's where a lot of, I think, marketers really that's where we got this idea that we were really great marketers. Was from a lot of that content that we were creating, that creativity that we could express. And then we shifted the pendulum and swung all the way over to the other side. And we decided that we've got to be data driven. I'm going to look at digital, I'm going to look at data, I'm going to look at all of these other things. And somehow we didn't connect the two pieces of that entire ecosystem. We just let that pendulum swing from far from one end of hyper creativity with no measurement, all the way over to almost a digital world where we have algorithms that are creating things. I think we're beginning to see that we're coming back to that point of total connection, where we can create something and actually have visibility into it. And as a CMO, what I love is being able to see how that whole path actually occurred, so that things aren't kind of buried in these kind of covered silos. I can see how that path to creativity, to content, to my customer actually comes together in one seamless, process, which is really exciting for a marketer.
And at a base level, personalized content could just be the name. Instead of saying "Dear Sir" or "Madam," it says "Dear Paul." At a higher level, it could be an individualized screen that you could see with different colours that you're maybe more attuned to, all the way down to completely customised content that delivers to what you want. Probably the best organisation that we're working with at the moment that is embracing the content journey from creation themselves through to the ingestion of third-party UGC, so user-generated content, all the way through a content management model into how they take that content and use it to promote their brand, is Tourism Australia. It is the strategy that the team there have put in place around, because it's entirely content. Australia.com, the website, it's just compelling, amazing content selling the country to tourists. And it has to be visual, it has to be embracing. And yet different tourists want to see different things. Some want to see a beach, some want to see a kangaroo, some want to see, you know, high-rise buildings and great food. Starting to focus on what the data tells you in terms of delivering that content, but then having a content story that enables you to pull on content that you've created, content that someone else has created but given you the ability to use, content that someone else has sent you, and have that used real time. That's something that TA, I think, in the Australian market Tourism Australia is leading the way on, and there's other organisations that are getting there. And more, if I think about the maturity matrix again, organisations that are now predictive analytics, they're the ones that are saying, I've got analytics that tell me that this customer segment is going to have a high propensity to purchase. What's my content strategy for that team? And now they're back. They're kind of, we now know who we want to market towards. We're back at what's the content, as opposed to who am I marketing to, who am I marketing to, who am I marketing to.
And I think a couple of years ago what you saw, and certainly what we saw in the States, was kind of the big moments of failure where we only looked at the predictive analytics on that and said, now we know who this market is. Take the same content that we had for the mass market a year ago, change the color on it, maybe take what came out of their cart and just start to stalk people around the web with shoes you bought a week ago, right? That is the ultimate experience fail now, right? And you get that as a customer. So what we're seeing is, and what I've experienced, it's funny because as a consumer, I've experienced the Tourism Australia site, and it has now spoiled me for all other tourism sites. I gotta tell you, it makes me absolutely crazy. I just went and experienced another city. I went to a city tourism site, trying to figure out what to do in a city. I had an extra day, and it was all text. Like I had to read a novel just to figure out there were like 3 things to do. No, I want like a big picture with like the cute bear. It was a nightmare, but it really begins to spoil. Yeah, well, it's little bears, right? Cute little bears and kangaroos, and then, you know, it's all just really cute. And then the whole, you know, then they eat things. And
right. What if you're Konica Minolta or someone like that and you still office equipment? You don't have all those wonderful images and stuff to drive. Like photocopies look pretty boring no matter how you dress them up.
But again, it's about content. So if you think about their data will tell them that what's driving the decision on that copier versus another copier are these 4 or 5 compelling reasons. Those 4 or 5 compelling reasons change in hierarchy dependent upon whether you're in procurement, IT, infrastructure, or usage. How do I get to segment the audience profile by the right segment, and then what's my content? And it may be the brochureware if that example, but it's how you position that. Content's, you know, as well as being the amazing emotive engagement, content's also the text on the page. It's all content. It's about getting that content story to the right customer at the right time. That's what data allows you to do. But too many organisations were just focusing on segmentation and profiling and just cutting the data. They've kind of got that now to the point that it's in control. The next piece is then using that to create a content velocity story to get the right content.
And that's about utilities. Just like it's got to be like the useful information. Right?
It's got to be work. So the nirvana we've always spoken about is that marketing stops being marketing when it's just seen as useful information. Because you can't differentiate between when you're being sold to and when you're just being provided information that's useful for what you're looking for.
And you won't want to use a content blocker to block it.
Exactly.
Which is a big problem you have now, especially on mobile.
right. And it's not, it's funny. I was just speaking to someone just last week. They were talking about ad blockers. Like it's all of a sudden, like in the U.S., it's like someone woke up yesterday and realized that there were ad blockers. Now everyone wants to write a story about it. I mean, y'all have been dealing with this for years, but suddenly someone woke up yesterday and realized.
Well, and I think because they arrived on mobile. You had Ghostery.
Right.
I use Ghostery on my computer all the time and have a much faster experience when I browse. But now it's on your phone.
But the reality is that what you were blocking wasn't an ad. It's not like you had a visceral reaction to advertising. You had a visceral reaction to bad content, right? And so it's my husband is a king of ad blocking. Right.
5 trillion trackers.
And he has every blocker on his computers, right? And so I asked him one day, I'm like, what is it that you really have a problem with? Like, and he's like, I don't care about that ad. I'm never gonna need that product. I've bought from this brand before. I'm never gonna need it again. Now I need all the accessories that go along with it, but I don't need that thing again. And I think it goes back to what marketing and marketing strategists have really started to move forward with, and where we're seeing brands leap forward is that CMO who's able to track not only what their digital strategy is, that customer experience strategy of what those touch points physically are going to be, but what's that story that weaves it all together? How are we making those decisions to not continue to send me the pair of shoes that I went in store and bought yesterday?
But we also have the marketing organisations going, or the advertising agencies going, well, actually now we better change how we're advertising to people because people are now using these blockers. And people are saying, well, how come it's taken a blocker to get you to want to change the way that you're trying to track us and all the rest? So it's not as if it hasn't had an effect. It's had a...
I think it's, I'm being real honest. I think it's kind of like people are just trying to connect the dots in some of these things. I think the reality is that we've all craved relevance for a really long time. And I think those brands that are leapfrogging ahead are those ones that are delivering that content and that experience in the right time and in the right channel.
And to turn it into what you were saying before, content that is, it's marketing, it's advertising, but it's actually useful. You actually want to see it.
Exactly.
And I see that on some content I watch in America, some TV networks, they're doing ads which, the ad, you actually want to watch the ad. It's very rare to want to watch the ad. Watch these ads.
I'm just conscious of the time if some people have to go at 2. I know because you can stay over. Paul, I think you may have a hard stop at 2, but we might just keep going and if people want to stay after 2 and keep talking, that's fine, but if some people have to go, we'll just
Last bit we want to cover here is really around this content velocity story. And I think it really is where kind of the rubber hits the road, so to speak. You have 53% of marketers across the region that are committed to mobile, whether that is being a mobile first mindset or transitioning from the thought process of calling mobile a campaign and really calling mobile a strategy. We're seeing a mindset shift around mobile, which is incredibly positive. 31% have the measures in place to track the effectiveness of content performance, really seeing how content across the life cycle is performing rather than just seeing how maybe one thing downloaded one time. Kind of so back to your conversation around the printer, not looking at that one moment in time, but actually looking at how content is actually moving the needle and crossing it over the journey. 20% say that they are able to generate personalized content at scale and on demand. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that marketers are facing right now because they have an understanding and a path of how they can get to personalization, putting that name in that ad, really having that rich personalized experience. The challenge becomes how do we personalize at scale? And do we have that ability to look at kind of larger segments of our population and still personalize in a very relevant manner without losing some of that one-to-one relationship? Only 10%, I think this was the number that I am hoping, and I cross my fingers that year over year we see huge leaps and bounds in, is only 10% are actually able to deliver content to customers no matter where the customer is. Right, so that is that has to be that you are delivering the right experience through the right channel, because the reality is the customer is now defining what channel they want to be on and when and where they want to start the experience. It may not be at the very beginning of what we consider to be the funnel, right? They may be jumping in at various different stages and entering the journey at very different stages and through very different devices. So this is the number that we're seeing that really is kind of holding back that mindset, but we think that as we begin to change our views on data, as we begin to change our views on content, that as those two things merge and align, we'll start to see some significant improvement in that number.
So I've obviously missed something fundamental. What do you mean by content velocity?
Content velocity is really, well, actually you guys would be the best ones to define content velocity, because I'll be very honest, I loved the term and we stole it blatantly from Toby.
It's literally just how quickly you get from conception to...
It's how quickly you can generate personalised content and then get it to the customer.
Yep.
So if I know, for instance, that today you have a requirement to buy something, whatever it may be, how quickly I can get that to you in a marketing framework. So how quickly I can get content to you that will generate you to buy that from me or purchase that service or brand from me. So an example of that may be you may be an authenticated user on my website. I may know who you are. You may start. I may be a bank. You may start searching for a home loan. I already know who you are. I can pre-work out your approval level. I can pre-work out the details around what kind of credit card you may best be suited for, and I can get that to you personalised. Say, Andrew, understanding for a credit card. We've done some research. This is one we think would be best suited to your requirements. We've pre-approved it. Let's go. completely personalised content story from creation to you based on a requirement that we found out that you had. So if it takes me too long to work that out, you may have already got someone else's credit card and I've just wasted a lot of money. And you can see the benefits of being there quickly. So, and this is, this is a research study, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about our company strategy, but the entire strategy of Adobe, the reason we got into the digital marketing business in the first place is because our view is that content is what drives the relationship between a customer and the brand, that emotive connection. We are very lucky in that most organizations use our content creation tools to create content. Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. The most natural adjacency to that was the content lifecycle. Once content was being created, it was being put on the web, it was being put in websites, on apps to generate an engagement, and it was being analyzed by data. So Adobe got into the data analytics, the content management, the content velocity, and now we have the Marketing Cloud alongside the Creative Cloud. And for those of you that have seen our technology strategy further out, you'll know that what we're doing now is building that bridge between the two clouds to enable content creation through to content monetization to happen seamlessly at a platform level, not requiring you to create the content and then go and stick it in another system and then another system and another system. You can literally bring content into Photoshop and from Photoshop publish to the web. And that life cycle is an efficiency conversation, it's a productivity conversation, but more importantly, it's a speed to market conversation when you're talking to marketing.
So that's it for me. I'm Susie's looking at me like, please let that be the last slide. You've got I promise you that was the last one, but that takes us through all 6 sections. I know that we do have other country breakdowns, and I'm certainly happy to kind of talk about those afterwards.
So I think everyone gets the report. Yeah. The report has more details specific at the ANZ level, and also there's other country breakdowns.
Can we get the slides as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll always play that over just for photos.
So this is probably the one bit that glares out for me.
Yeah.
And it's kind of touched on, but it's not explicit, which is I still think there's a disconnect between content and experience. I mean, content is part of an experience, it's not the whole experience. And that's the bit where I think it's a high level structural idea, which is what's the role of marketing and CMOs in particular around the product idea. And I know that at a board level, when the boards who are thinking about stuff strategically, where they realise they have a problem on the board is actually at a product level. They don't have great product people. And that's the bit that strikes me as still a bit of a disconnect. That's what I'm saying.
So marketers arguably, anywhere between like 5 and 7 years ago, we lost product and pricing.
Yep.
It used to be kind of in the earlier days part of our purview, and we started to see that splinter off. But for a large part, we lost product and pricing.
Yep.
And we lost it because a lot of the times we couldn't measure it. We were just talking about advertising around it. We weren't necessarily talking about what we're talking about today, which is what Paul just described is that experience across the credit card.
Yep.
That in and of itself is a product and a path to monetization, right? That is a very different conversation than marketing was having, say, 5 years ago.
Yep.
But the reality is that marketing is now key to that conversation. In fact, marketers in a lot of organizations are being charged to find new paths to monetization that involve a process like that and involve in-depth personalization. So I think we're starting to move back towards product, we're moving back towards pricing. That's really because we've been able to use the data and use that personalization.
Let me add, if I can add something to that, and then unfortunately I have to go to the question because otherwise Susie can set up a call for anyone if they want to stay with mine. So I did a marketing degree, so I did a business degree with a major in marketing, and I went with 4 Ps, and you learn about product, price, promotion, and place, and you do consumer behaviour, all that kind of stuff. The interesting thing now is that we get approached by a lot of academic institutions, one of which in particular, Swinburne University, we've just gone to market with, to help them build a curriculum for marketing that's around data and analytics, which is super interesting. So for me, when I left school and chose my university degree, I probably wouldn't have chosen to do a course that was based on data and statistics and analytics. That's not what I liked. For me, it was about marketing and advertising and promotions and psychology and how to engage with customers. But marketing is moving to become a baseline of data, because without that analytics and without that understanding of data, so we have as an organisation that leads the world in the content creation tools and now in digital marketing tools, We have academic institutions asking us to help them build curriculum for marketing courses on data. Because even the educators aren't there yet, but the industry is saying we need these skills in the marketplace. You've got to start educating marketers, not just on consumer behaviour and branding, but on analytics and data and insight. And that's not a statistical course, that's a marketing course. So just in terms of someone who's grown up in marketing or did a marketing degree, I've run marketing teams and now I run an organisation that sells marketing technology. It's a big change. It's a really big change that's happening in the industry.
But again, to sort of say David's perspective, you've got a huge amount of, or your customers have a huge amount of information around what's actually happening in the real world of buying stuff. And the obvious thing to do is then to connect that back into how does a company develop a product. But I still think that's a bit of a mistake.
I agree.
It's not an issue. It's
I agree. So the customer level, we think about we think it's great content. The brand campaign will get you the affinity with the brand.
Yep.
But back to the conversation about the watch, if the engineering or the engagement with the product doesn't work the way that the brand or the marketing told you that it would, that's a breakdown.
Yeah.
So philosophically speaking, you would hope that the product engineering angle was, or to, if I use the Etihad example, that the in-flight experience the cabin crew gives you when you're on board the plane, if that doesn't meet the brand campaign that told you it was going to be amazing, then you have a misconception on expectation.
Yeah, I mean, somebody mentioned Andy Larkin, the point he made a couple of weeks ago when he was talking was that the companies, Ubers and Airbnbs and all those companies come along, if you actually look at what do the people who work in those companies do, they make stuff. You know, they calls them basically, makers versus managers, he calls it.
Yeah.
And the people who've come through and changed everything have a really high percentage of people in the organisation who make stuff because the product becomes the market. The experience, and part of it is that as well. The experience is the market.
But I mean, again, we used the example of Tesla before. Tesla's not just about when the car's in the garage.
Yeah.
You've got your tablet or your phone or your watch telling you the battery level, how hot the car is, how cold the car is, what the car's thinking about right now.
Yep.
You know, you're changing the warp. I mean, you've got an engagement with the car when you're not in the car.
Yeah.
For a car manufacturer, it's exactly what you want.
Yeah.
You can imagine them sitting down and saying, how do we get people to think about the car in the garage when they're not in the car?
Yeah.
Just to create that constant affinity. And that connection with engineering, I think, is critical.
Yeah.
Some of those people think about that sort of stuff now. How hot's my bloody car when I'm going to get there, but they can't do anything about it.
Well, if you had a Tesla, you could turn the air conditioning on.
That's
Right.
Well, you know, I'm sure we've thought about it. It'd be nice to have a little remote control.
Guys, I'm so sorry, I have to run. Thank you for coming in. If you guys want to, I'll let Susie.
Yeah, thanks guys.